Alrighty, welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Tuesday, January 14th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the storylines you want to watch as we head into this national championship week. Then we'll get into a little position battles all across the board. We'll go from quarterback to special teams, break down all the things you need to know, and the little edges that I think certain teams have, Ohio State or Notre Dame. Very, very tough, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Then we'll get to some questions around the other CFP teams. You know, the eliminated teams, where do they go from here? What is the biggest question for their offseason, including Penn State with a lot of news that happened yesterday. Then we'll get to some transfer portal kind of winter wrap-up. A lot of different things have happened in this winter cycle. Still a couple of different dominoes to fall, but want to make sure you guys have a full look on what has happened thus far. And then we'll get into a Top 10 Tuesday. I'll give my best players in the national title. Remarkably hard to break down, but I feel like I got my 10, feel pretty good about it. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $sign, add any comment, a question or comment you like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that, and we can have a fun back and forth, get this a little bit off the ground a little bit. But let's go ahead and jump into these storylines, because there's a lot of them. There's a lot of different ways to look at this national title. There's a lot of different ways to talk about this national title. But I have about 6 storylines here that I think are going to be huge and definitely be talked about quite a bit throughout this week, along with a couple others that I think will be talked about quite a bit. And let's start off with just the most obvious one of the bunch, which is these are 2 of the top 5 programs in college football history. Really, no matter how you cut it. You can go by wins, you can go by titles, you can go by just prestige, you can go by conference titles, whatever you want to cut it as. These are 2 of the top 5 programs in college football history. You could very well argue they're 2 of the top 3, along with Alabama. So, remarkable programs, remarkable history. Guys like Newt Rockne and Woody Hayes and Jim Tressel and a million other guys that have been a huge part of both these programs' histories. And Ohio State second in wins all time. Notre Dame's fourth. Ohio State has 8 titles. Notre Dame has 13. Now Notre Dame's was the last one, was back in 1988. So trying to get back on the mountaintop. Obviously, the last one for Ohio State was the first time in the 4-team playoff back in 2014 with that amazing Cardale Jones run. That was one of the most memorable runs that I can, at least in my lifetime, for sure. But overall, I think these are remarkable programs for a million different reasons, obviously. They've been at the mountaintop, but more than anything else, there hasn't really been a moment where they've just been afterthoughts in the world of college football. Both these programs have done such a good job hiring elite coaches and getting elite talent in there very consistently, and also having the university kind of just be lockstep in the athletic department in the football program and really set them up for success, even when you move from a Jim Tressel to an Urban Meyer, or an Urban Meyer to a Ryan Day, or in Notre Dame's case, a Brian Kelly to a Marcus Freeman. They've been able to sustain success really throughout that time. Obviously, Notre Dame hasn't been quite on top of the mind as much as Ohio State has been the last decade or so, but both these programs are at least around 9-10 win programs pretty much every single year, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon. Frankly, I see both of them kind of kicking it into a new gear as we head into this new world of college football. But both programs are obviously top 5 in college football history, and they have a chance to add a new chapter to that story. You know, Notre Dame can add a 14th title, the first since 1988. Ohio State can continue to be probably the best program in the entire country and get back on the mountaintop for the first time in just about 11 years. A decade. Let's just be totally fair, a decade. But remarkable programs, and they'll be facing off in the biggest game of the entire year. Then you got some head coach recalibration, and somewhat this has already happened for Marcus Freeman, I would say, but I do think he still has that last hump to get over. And then Ryan Day, I don't even know if I have to explain, but we'll start with Marcus Freeman. I do think during that Georgia game, there were a lot of people that kind of changed the way they look at Marcus Freeman. I always thought he was a fantastic head coach that stumbled at different moments against inferior competition, like Marshall and NIU. Always thought he was a great head coach, but there were questions there, no doubt about it. I didn't necessarily think he was going to be able to go toe-to-toe with Kirby Smart. He was more than able to do that. So he's obviously gotten a little bit of a boost throughout this tournament, but let's be honest. He lifts a national championship in his 3rd year at Notre Dame, becomes the 3rd coach in the entire country to be a national champion. I think you're in a position where the NFL's calling very aggressively, especially that Bears job, which we have some news around the NFL realm around Deion Sanders that we can break down tomorrow. But overall, I do think it's one of those moments where Marcus Freeman's had this recalibration just a little bit, but there is that last moment. There is that last moment. Say they lose this game, they come back next year and lose an early game to a team they're not supposed to. The conversation will start right back up again. But if you have that national title next to your name, a lot of things will go by the wayside in the future for Marcus Freeman. But do think the recalibration has happened for him just a little bit. From Ryan Day, it's an entirely different conversation. He's had a couple of moments. He had Bama in 2020. Excuse me, I feel like yesterday I said LSU. It was Bama in 2020. Still a team that was an absolute buzzsaw by the end of it. But the reality is, this is the moment where he has to break through. One way or the other, he has to find a way to win this game. If he doesn't, a million people will be asking a million questions, and let's just be totally honest, Marcus Freeman will be getting a lot of people talking about him. We'll talk about that here in a second, but overall, both these guys are top 5 coaches in the sport. I would probably rank them there right now. Now, Marcus Freeman's one that we can have a conversation about, but I feel like Ryan Day is very firmly in that top 5 conversation. To me, Marcus Freeman has entered that conversation throughout the last couple of weeks, but one of them is going to join Dabo Swinney and Kirby Smart as the only national championship coaches in the entire country. That is a very, very exclusive club, and actually we'll talk about that probably later in the week, maybe on Thursday, that the coaching expectations in college football are totally out of control, as are the quarterback expectations, and I kind of want to zero in on Texas as a reason for that, but we'll get into that on Thursday likely. Definitely a segment that I was very interested in, it's one we should talk about, but both these coaches are going to get a little bit of a recalibration, going to get a little bit of a boost, especially Ryan Day can totally change the way that he is looked at by Ohio State fans and beyond on Monday. Then you do have the big one, Marcus Freeman versus his former team. Jim Tressel was his head coach when he was there from 2006 to 2008. Troy Smith and Terrell Pryor were his quarterbacks, and that was one of my favorite eras of Ohio State football. I actually grew up with a friend that was a big-time Ohio State football fan. Shout out Mark, but it was a remarkable group of players, and he was the second leading tackler on pretty much every single year of those teams, right behind James Laurinaitis, which is not a bad person to be behind by any means. So, remarkable player for that Ohio State team. Didn't quite get to that national title level, so obviously it's going to be a little bit of a motivation here, but I don't think there's any bad blood motivation. I don't think there's any, him chip on his shoulder type energy, because he wasn't really passed over in 2019 when Ryan Day got this job. He was the DC at Cincinnati and was doing a fantastic job. So there could be an argument to be made that if Ohio State was a little bit more out there with their coaching search, they could have made it happen. But let's be totally honest. If Urban Meyer gives Ryan Day his stamp of approval, Ryan Day is going to get that job. So I don't think there's any bad blood in that respect, but there is a storyline here. There's no doubt about that. And I think the big thing here that I think probably won't be talked about too much as we get up to this thing, but very well could be talked about right after, is if Marcus Freeman, a former Ohio State player and one that a lot of people remember and have very fond memories of, beats Ryan Day in a national title in his third year as a head coach, a lot of people are going to be pushing for Ohio State to try to steal him from Notre Dame, to run Ryan Day out of town and say, this is our guy going forward. I don't think that's going to happen. I want to make that very, very clear, but I'm just telling you how fan bases work. If they see a guy that once donned the scarlet and gray go out and beat their guy, there's going to be a lot of questions around that, and there's going to be a lot of people pushing for Marcus Freeman to take over as the head coach. Again, do not expect that to happen, but definitely something that will create that little bit more pressure around Ryan Day and that little bit more, prestige around what Marcus Freeman is doing. Then you do have this one, and it's one that a little bit more internet-driven, a little bit more of a fun narrative than anything else. Not necessarily anything crazy here, but if you don't remember what happened, in the game last year that they played that went down to the wire, Ohio State won on a walk-off touchdown by Chip Trayanum, 17-14, remarkable game, crazy game, but before that game, Lou Holtz did say that Notre Dame was going to win because Ohio State is quote-unquote soft. Under Ryan Day, they have been a quote-unquote soft team, according to Lou Holtz, and Ohio State went out and proved that wrong. They played incredibly good defense, ran the ball very effectively, and were able to win that game at the end. And then Ryan Day gave a little bit of a call out to Lou Holtz, saying, "Where is Lou Holtz right now?" But at the end of the day, I don't think this will be a whole lot. If I'm being totally honest, I don't know how much traction you'll get out of this one. I don't know how much talk you'll get out of this one in this weekend, throughout this week, but I do think there will be a little bit of this. And frankly, I'd be lying to you if I didn't kind of want Lou Holtz to stir the pot just a little bit. Not necessarily throw aggressive stones or anything like that, but give him a little poke at some point and see what happens, because I think it would add just a little bit of flavor to this one. Obviously, Jeremiah Love referenced wanting to play Ohio State. He wants to play the best. Felt like Ohio State was better than Texas. That was obviously proven, and he wants to get a revenge for this game right here. So I'm sure Lou Holtz is right there with him on that one. It's going to be a little bit of a underlying storyline, and one that mainly you'll see on kind of the Twitter world and the Instagram world, but at the end of the day, I do think it's going to be a really interesting one, and I got to be honest, I'm really hoping Lou Holtz just says one or two little things throughout this week that get Ryan Day just that little bit fired up. But hopefully it's not anything too aggressive, of course. But moving forward to the quarterbacks, I can't say enough what these quarterbacks have done for this team. And I understand, they're not the most physically imposing guys. They're not the guys that are going to throw it 60 yards down the field. They're not the guys that are going to throw across their body and throw a laser into coverage. They're not a guy that's going to, I don't want to say that, but I don't think they are going to be guys that are going to have long, illustrious NFL careers. Both of them are very capable of that. I think Will Howard will get definite looks. I think Riley Leonard's a little bit tougher of a sell with some of the passing issues that he does have, but at the end of the day, both these guys have done incredible things this year. Whatever happens in the NFL world, whatever happens in the future for these guys, what they've done for these teams this year cannot be overstated, because you're walking into Ohio State. You're walking into Notre Dame. You're not walking into Purdue. You're not walking into Northwestern. You're not walking into Vanderbilt, where there needs to be leadership. If you're not stepping up in leadership, you're going to lose games. In this one, they didn't necessarily have to. They didn't have to be the big-time leaders of this team. They didn't have to be the guys that are hyping up everyone on the sideline and giving the pregame speeches and doing all of that stuff. They just became those guys. Will Howard almost especially, but Will Howard's just a little bit more outspoken than Riley Leonard. I think Riley Leonard is all the leadership that Will Howard does have, but it's been remarkable to watch what these two quarterbacks have done and how all of these teams that have been together for a really long time. While we talk about what Caleb Downs has done and what Jeremiah Smith has done and what Anthony Knapp has done for Notre Dame, all the guys there are the veteran guys. The basis of those teams are the veteran guys like JTT, like Jack Sawyer, like Howard Cross, like Xavier Watts. Those are the guys that are the staples of this team, and these quarterbacks came into the room and became the outright leaders of this team. It's been absolutely remarkable to watch, and even Steve Angeli is following Riley Leonard, a guy that got passed over for the starting job this year and very well could have argued that he deserved the starting job. He was more than happy to walk out of that game last week and said, if Riley Leonard's ready to go, Riley's going to be our guy. And that's a very good testament to why transfer quarterbacks can work. They're always a risk. You're always going to have certain moments where it doesn't meld, it doesn't work, the personalities just doesn't fit. But in Columbus and South Bend, they are feeling very good about the money they spent to go get these guys, about the guys that they got, because not only have they brought great play down the stretch of the season, they brought a certain amount of leadership that these teams needed in different moments where it looked like their season was done. So remarkable job by both these guys on the field, but more importantly off the field. They've become outright leaders of teams that they just really didn't have to be outright leaders of, and it's really made the difference and a big reason why they're here right now. And then the biggest one that everyone will be talking about throughout this week is the 12-team playoff stamp. The one that everyone will be talking about is these teams wouldn't have gotten into the 4-team, and we'll talk about kind of what the CFP has done in the first year and kind of my grade on the CFP, quote-unquote, after 1 year. But overall, you do have the Notre Dame game in Week 2 against NIU. You do have the game against Michigan. I would argue that the two biggest upsets in the entire year. And obviously, Michigan-Ohio State's a little bit in a different realm, of course, but I do think when you talk about the optics going into that game, the way that people were talking about it, and how it went down, I do think it was the second biggest upset right behind that Notre Dame NIU game, but it's been remarkable to see what Ryan Day and Marcus Freeman have been able to do to keep their guys locked in, especially Marcus Freeman with all the stuff on the line the last 11 weeks of the season. Being able to handle that business has been incredible, but overall, they've had tougher roads to the CFP national title, and it's something that a lot of us will forget at the end of the day. A lot of us, 10 years from now won't think about the NIU game that sparked that Notre Dame title title run. Some of us will definitely think about that Michigan-Ohio State game, but overall, these were moments that needed to happen. As upsetting as they were, as bad as they were, and as memed as they were, there were moments that absolutely had to happen for both these teams, and it's made them who they are and probably put them in a position to win this national title, because I could easily make the argument that Ohio State wins that game by 3, even if they lose in the Big Ten championship. They are not this team in the CFP. I would make the same argument for Notre Dame down the stretch of this season. I don't think they're the same team if NIU doesn't take their lunch money in the second week. So a lot of great storylines as we head into this one, and we will continue to break down some grandiose storylines, some more nitty-gritty stuff tomorrow, but overall some great ones, and it's going to be really, really fun to watch a lot of those unfold. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we'll do position battles for the national title. We'll go from quarterback to special teams. I'm already rethinking one of these, and we'll get to that here in a second, but stick with us, and we'll be right back with the position battles for the national championship.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about these storylines as we head into this national championship one. Let's be honest, the biggest one you're going to hear is Marcus Freeman playing his former team. Was an incredible player for that team in 2006 to 2008. We finally found it. But let's get into the second segment here, and we got position battles all across the board, and there are some really hard ones to pick in here. There are some very, very easy ones to pick in here, and let's go ahead and jump into this thing because we got a lot to get to. But let's jump in, and the biggest one, obviously, is quarterback. And I do lean Ohio State in this scenario. I think Will Howard has the slight edge at the quarterback position over Riley Leonard. Both these guys are very, very talented. Both these guys can make tons of plays. There's no doubt about that. The only difference to me is I think Will Howard has that little bit more of the ability to push the ball downfield into tight windows more than Riley Leonard does. And that's just something that I think is going to be a little bit more important in this game. You have two front sevens that are absolute nightmares to deal with offensive lines that are downright sketchy as we head into this thing, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But overall, I lean Will Howard. I think they're both incredible quarterbacks. Both have played really good football throughout the CFP. I just think when I look at these two teams, I think Will Howard's going to have more answers for what Notre Dame can throw at them than probably Riley Leonard will have for Ohio State. But very, very close. Two guys that I think have played just remarkably good football, and to be honest, wouldn't be surprised at all if Riley Leonard outplayed Will Howard and won this game. But I do think I'll give the edge to Will Howard here. I think the passing ability downfield has been incredible throughout this tournament and gives him the slight edge in this one. Running back. This one's tough. I'll be totally honest with you, and I'll be totally honest that I don't really know. I think one of the big-time reasons that I went Ohio State's direction here is Jeremiah Love. I don't know if he's going to be fully healthy going into this game. If he is fully healthy, he's one of the very best players in this game, and it is a outright even battle when you talk about running backs. But I can't say that with confidence, so I got to go with Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. I think those two guys have played incredibly good football. Judkins had a vicious block in that Texas game that shows you the edge that he plays with, and then Travion Henderson, just that guy that's going to make those big time plays. You know, you do not want to let him get out in space because it is a special player. There's no doubt about that. I'll talk about my draft rankings probably in a little bit here, but this guy might be my running back too. He is an absolute monster and is a guy that I very much like going into the draft. Obviously has had different moments where it hasn't worked quite as well throughout his career, but really, really talented player. So I'll lean Judkins and Henderson over Price and Love, but these are maybe the two best running back duos, two of the three. I won't leave Katron Allen and Nick Singleton out of this conversation, but remarkable running back duos, and I think Ohio State has the very, very slight edge in this one. Ohio State has the very big edge in this one. Let's just be totally honest. This was the easiest one of the bunch. No disrespect to the Notre Dame group, because I do like what Jordan Faison is doing. I think Jaden Greathouse is a downright star in a couple of years, but the group for Ohio State is downright different in every sense of the word. It might be the best group in the country, and it starts with that guy right there. Jeremiah Smith has been absolutely incredible this year. Meke Igbuka, Carnell Tate, Brendan Ennis, if you want to add him in there for fun. They have so many guys that are going to pop up in big-time moments. All three of those guys have made big-time plays in the last 3 games, and I think they have a very comfortable edge in this respect. Now, I do think Jaden Greathouse is a guy that kind of can even the scales physicality-wise with these Ohio State corners, so that's something to watch. But overall, very, very it's impossible to beat this Ohio State wide receiver group. You know, we could do this argument for Texas, Ohio State last week. I probably would have leaned Ohio State. That would have been very, very close, but at the end of the day, Ohio State, I think, has the best wide receiver room in the country, and a huge reason for that is number 4. But there's another easy one, very, very easy one. It was the tight end, and it's Mitchell Evans is an absolute difference maker in every sense of the word. Very good inline blocker, obviously a guy you can put out in the slot and make some plays in the pass game. G. Scott is great, and he's a fantastic player and is a huge player for that Ohio State team, as he showed in that Texas game. But Mitchell Evans is one of the top 5 tight ends in the country, definitely a guy that can make a big-time effect in, as we just talked about, with the gap that is there with the wide receiver department. You got to make sure you make plays. You got to make sure you take advantage of these linebackers like Sonny Styles, like Cody Simon, and some very, very talented guys. But Gunnar Helm was able to find some openings, and Mitchell Evans will absolutely have to find openings in this game, no doubt about that. This is the really tough one, and the one that I'm regretting just a little bit. I'll be totally honest with you. But this is a very, very tough one. Anthony Knapp not playing in this game probably made the difference. I think he is an absolute difference maker, even as a freshman, and even as having a guy like Tosh Baker, who's more experienced coming in for him. I can't trust it. You know, he looked good against Penn State. It's not necessarily to bury Tosh Baker or anyone that's going to come in for him, but it is to say there is a drop-off there, and I'm a little bit worried about that. That being said, on the Ohio State side, they've had a little bit of mistakes. You know, the interior of that offensive line did struggle at different moments against Texas, but they've done an incredible job. Donovan Jackson's probably made more money than anyone else in the CFP thus far when you talk about the NFL draft, and the rest of the group has just been really great. I think it's incredibly close, but with the injuries and the time to get ready for those injuries and replace those guys, I'm going to go Ohio State. I think they found a little bit more of a groove as a group, and Notre Dame will be introducing a new group in that national title. So I'll lean towards Ohio State. You can make a very, very good argument for Notre Dame, and frankly, yesterday I was making arguments both directions. I probably wrote down 3 different things before I got to Ohio State. So I'm going to stick with Ohio State here. I think Donovan Jackson really makes the difference for me. D-line, I'm going to go with Ohio State here as well. Now, this one, if you were to split it into interior and edge rushing, I think we could have a better conversation. You know, you have Howard Cross in the middle there. You have a lot of guys in the middle, that Donovan Hinnish that can make a number of plays for Notre Dame. So maybe I would have given the lean to Notre Dame when you talk about interior defensive line. But when you talk about the quartet, I suppose, of Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Ty Hamilton, and Talik Williams, it's about as good as it gets. Those 4 guys across the front are an absolute nightmare, and then you lose Riley Mills on the other side. You just got to lean Ohio State in this spot. Very, very close. 2 very talented groups. What's going on, Anthony? Nice to see you. But I would lean Ohio State here. Very, very talented group, and one of the groups that you look across the board, you are seeing NFL talent all across that board. Linebacker, I'm going to go with Notre Dame. I've seen a couple of people go with Ohio State here, and I get it. Cody Simon and Sonny Styles have been downright incredible throughout this tournament. 2 guys that are very rangy, very athletic, very smart. But you look at the group that Notre Dame has at linebacker, it is downright incredible. They have Jack Kaiser, Drake Bowen, Jalen Sneed, Jaden Osbury. All of those guys are going to make big-time plays. So maybe it's not, I think the top-line guys are better on Notre Dame than they are on Ohio State. But you have 4 guys that are going to make big-time plays pretty much every single game. You have 4 guys that are going to be in the right spot and make some really, really impactful plays throughout this game. So while I love Cody Simon and Sonny Styles, and this is a very, very tough battle, I think you look at the depth at that linebacker position for Notre Dame, and it's really, really hard to deny that they are the team that I'd give the slight advantage to in this spot. Corner was a really tough one, guys. It's another one that I could not get a beat on, but again, an injury is the difference here. I think Benjamin Morrison, if he was on that cornerback group for Notre Dame, I'd fully go that direction, but he's not. I think Denzel Burke is the best cornerback in this thing. I think he is a guy that can make all the difference in the world, and while Notre Dame has been downright elite on the outside, I think Ohio State has that little bit more of depth, especially with that Benjamin Morrison injury, than Notre Dame has. So looking beyond Davison Igbinosun and Denzel Burke, you have Jermaine Matthews, you have Lorenzo Styles, you have so many different guys that can make some plays and really step in big-time moments at those corner positions. Now, on the other side, you got Christian Gray, you got Leonard Moore, you got a ton of guys. Jordan Clark has played incredible football, so it's really not to say that there is a massive gap here or anything like that. I think this is probably as razor thin as you're going to find in the entire position battle for this game, but at the end of the day, I'm going to go with the guys that fly downhill. I'm going to go with the guys I trust I don't even want to say that. It is remarkably close. Frankly, I probably should have put a push here. These two groups are absolutely incredible, and Anthony, you said DB position. I could very easily make the argument that Notre Dame has the advantage here. So I really kind of went back and forth on this one. Love Christian Gray, love Leonard Moore, love what they've been able to do. I'm going to go with the star power over at Ohio State by a remarkably small margin. I'm going to go with Ohio State here. I'm also going to go with Ohio State here. So, Anthony, I do kind of disagree with you with the DB position, but overall, when I look at this safety group, it is not about the top line guys, because Caleb Downs, Xavier Watts, take your pick. They're absolutely incredible top to bottom, but Lathan Ransom, Jordan Hancock, those are the guys that are going to make all the types of difference in this game, and I think they're guys that play about as good at football as you could possibly imagine. You know, if Caleb Downs wasn't on this team, we'd be talking about Lathan Ransom a whole lot more. I can promise you that. So, really, really talented players. Now, you do have Xavier Watts, you have Jalen Schuler, you have CJ Reed on the other side, or CJ Hurd, on the other side. So, it's not like it's a massive blowout by any means, but I just think Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom is that little bit better. So overall, I think you look at these two defenses, especially when you look in the back end, where linebacker, cornerback, and safety. Those are the ones where take your pick. Both groups are absolutely incredible, especially in that back end with cornerbacks and safeties. I think is an absolute toss-up. I'll lean Ohio State because some of the depth pieces that they do have that I feel a little bit more confident in, but at the end of the day, these are remarkable groups, two of the best groups in the country, and it was remarkably hard to make the pick here. And then you have this. I'll be totally honest. Neither of these groups are all that good. Neither of these groups are really going to be ones that are going to downright change this game. Now, Mitchell Jeter has teamed to turn a little bit of a corner, so wanted to give him a little bit of respect here. Definitely thought about going that direction, but Jaden Fielding's been a little bit more reliable from the spot this year. They punted a little bit better at Ohio State, so it's margins, and it's really not great margins for either team, if I'm being totally honest, but these are two teams that are not necessarily going to are going to live with their kickers one way or the other. It's going to be an interesting game, but if it comes down to special teams, there will not be one fan for either of these teams that feel great about their position when that kicker runs out on the field. That's pretty much the end-all be-all here. It's going to be a very interesting battle. I think Mitch Jeter is hitting a little bit of a stride, but those misses early in the season are still a little bit of a worry for me, especially when you get on that national championship stage. So overall, I think these position battles are tough. The quarterback battle is one that I think you could go either direction. I'm going Will Howard. Running back, one you could go either direction. I'm going to go with the Ohio State duo. I think wide receiver, tight end are downright easy, if I'm being totally honest. And then you get into the nightmares. You know, O-line, D-line, linebacker is one that I go Notre Dame. I think a lot of people would go towards Ohio State. And then the DB group, take your pick. They're both absolutely elite in every sense of the word. I'll give the slight lean to Ohio State in both those spots, but man, it's going to be really weird. And Anthony, you might be right. Maybe the special teams has nothing to do with the players. Maybe it has nothing to do with the kicking ability of these players. Maybe it's just the ability to execute that one or two fake punts throughout this game or fake kicks that totally change this one. So it'll be interesting to see, and definitely will have their hands full going into this one, but going to be awesome to watch all of that unfold. Obviously, I could be very wrong about a lot of those. Maybe Xavier Watts makes all the plays in the world and makes me look like an idiot, but at the end of the day, really, really fun groups in this one, and not a lot separating these teams at a lot of these positions. So let's take our second break here, and when we come back, let's just do biggest questions for the teams that have already been eliminated from the CFP. We'll go through Georgia. Do they have their quarterback right now, or is he coming in from somewhere else? Can Boise State and Arizona State replace their running backs, and a ton more? Real quick, I want to make sure I get into, you're absolutely right. They do a remarkable job of just, no one's going to hit you over the head. No one's going to fly around the field. No one's going to be the guy that, chases a running back sideline to sideline. They're going to be where they need to be. They're going to fill gaps as well as really anyone in the entire country, and they are going to tackle. You are not going to get away from them very often. So I think that's the kind of their superpower. It's not necessarily beating you over the head with downright talent. It's just being able to diagnose and evaluate plays at a very, very elite level. So that's actually a big reason I went Notre Dame, is Jack Kaiser and those guys are so veteran, so smart, that I just lean them a little bit over Ohio State's group. But let's take our second break here. When we come back, let's talk about the CFP eliminated teams. Biggest questions for them going into the offseason, because there's quite a few of them around these teams, and Penn State's just got a little bit bigger. And we'll talk about that right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the position battles as we head into the national title. A lot of them that are about as close as you could possibly get. Those DBs are downright elite on both sides of the ball. You could pick either of them, and I'd totally back you. If I'm being totally honest, I lean Ohio State very slightly at both positions, but it is as close as you could possibly get it. But let's jump into some eliminated teams from the CFP. We've talked about the national title winners, and we will talk about them plenty over the next couple of days. But let's get to the teams that have been eliminated from this thing that are looking towards the offseason. And what does that look like? What is the offseason biggest question is where I'm going to start here. And a lot of these are a little bit obvious. A lot of these are maybe a little bit more off the beaten path than you were thinking. But let's start with Oregon, and we'll start with Dante Moore. Is Dante Moore ready? Is a big-time question. Now, if you ask Tez Johnson, he would say yes. He would say he's going to be a Heisman finalist next year, so you wouldn't have to worry about it from that perspective. But there is a big-time question, because the reality is Dillon Gabriel walking out the door is one of the most consistent commodities in all of college football. He has been for the last couple of years, and absolutely was that for Oregon this year. And you look back, you lost Bo Nix, you had to bring in Dillon Gabriel because you needed that steady hand to kind of lead this offense. Not to say that Dante Moore can't do that. I frankly believe his ability is better than what Dillon Gabriel has. I think he has more of ability to push the ball downfield and make some of those explosive plays that Oregon very much loves to make. But at the end of the day, he is a first-year starter. He is a guy jumping in for a very consistent, very even type quarterback. It's going to be an experiment. It's going to be really interesting to watch what those first couple of games look like for this kid and how he kind of gets acclimated to this new world of Oregon football. Very talented kid, all the ability in the world, but is about to step up in a number of different respects, especially leadership, and you never really know how a kid reacts to that until you see him on the football field. And then for Georgia, just who's the quarterback? Not only is Garner Stockton ready, but just who's the quarterback going to be? Because Georgia just continues to kick around in that transfer portal. When you talk about quarterbacks, Deshaun Purdy is a guy you're going to want to watch from Charlotte. Sounds like Georgia is really pushing for him. CJ Obanaya, another guy from Buffalo. It sounds like Georgia is in for him as well, and I don't really know what the plan is here. It's very, very hard to get a beat on. I do think Gunnar Stockton will be the starter in 2025. I think even if you bring in one of those guys, I think Gunnar Stockton's probably going to be the better quarterback. I think he'll have the ability to start. That being said, it doesn't sound like that's an end-all be-all. It does sound like Ryan Puglisi is going to get a fair share of look. It sounds like whoever comes in from the portal is going to get a fair share amount of look at that quarterback position. So it's going to be a battle. It's going to be one of those things that you're going to have to go back and forth on, and it's definitely something that throughout spring we'll be watching very closely. You know, if they bring in Deshaun Purdy, let's say in the next couple of days, and he's a guy that's going into fall camp, very, very talented quarterback, has all the ability in the world, he very much could steal that job from Gunnar Stockton. I will say, I think Gunnar Stockton's going to be the guy, but there's some big-time shoes to fill, and it doesn't sound like that answer is coming anytime soon. So that's a big-time question, and likely one we'll know sometime in the middle of the summer. Maybe we won't know until fall camp, frankly. And then Boise State's the easiest question and the hardest answer. How do you replace Ashton Jeanty? Because I don't think he can. I'll be totally honest with you. I think the clear answer is just no. You cannot replace this kid. Now, it doesn't mean you're not going to be successful in 2025. It just means your offense is taking a step back. You're not getting a 2,500-yard rusher. You're probably not going to be able to replace that even in the aggregate. He's an absolute monster and is absolutely someone that is going to make a difference. And Anthony, you make up a great point. I love what Ryan Montgomery is going to bring to that room. I tend to believe Ryan Puglisi is a guy that I think is going to be very, very successful and then make way for Ryan Montgomery. But at the end of the day, the things you've heard about that kid would not surprise me at all if he came under the scene and totally just took over that place. But Boise State, you're just not going to have that guy. Now, Sire Gaines can assist. The pass game needs to improve, and I expect it will. The defense needs to be a little bit better, but you're not replacing this guy. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be something that you're really going to be able to do in total. What you can do is at least tread water enough and get better enough in other places to kind of supplement that to a degree, at the very least. Same question, just a different player for Arizona State. Cam Skattebo, how do you replace this guy? I think they're a little bit more equipped to replace him than Boise State was. Now, I don't think either of them are fully going to replace what this guy brought to this team because what he did was downright historic. He was the first running back with 1,500 yards rushing, 500 yards receiving since 2016. Remarkable player, but you look forward to what they have. Raleek Brown and Kyson Brown are going to be the guys that you're going to want to watch in that backfield. Was trying to figure out Raleek's last name, but I do believe it is Brown. But both those guys do need to step up in the run game. I don't see the pair of them going for 1,700 yards and 21 touchdowns. But they can help. They can bridge that gap. And then you do have a guy like Jordan Tyson on the outside. I expect Sam Levitt to take another step forward. So I think they have a little bit more of the talent to replace this guy. But at the end of the day, what he was to this team cannot be said enough. And he is going to be an absolute problem to replace for Arizona State and Kenny Dillingham. Is Arch Manning the answer? Is the question for Texas, and it's something that will be the question the entire year, and it might go into the year, frankly. But at the end of the day, Arch Manning's ability is out of this world. I don't think I need to tell anyone that. I don't think anyone needs to understand that. You've seen that very, very clearly. This kid's just a little bit different than a lot of the other kids out there. That being said, he did not play this year very much, and he is in a position where you are stepping onto the field being the guy for this team, being the outright leader for this team for the very first time in August, and you're going up to Columbus, Ohio to do it. So there's a lot of pressure on him already. Before you even step on the field, there's going to be a lot of pressure. The second he steps on the field, that's going to quadruple. It's going to be an absolute battle for him pretty much every single week. But for Texas, the problems go deeper than the quarterback position. Quinn Ewers did keep them from being the elite offense that they could have been in some different circumstances, but at the end of the day, Arch Manning is not going to be the Band-Aid that fixes all of the problems. They're going to have to get better in a number of different places, but at the end of the day, this is a guy that's uber talented, and I do think he's a guy that can lead them to a national title. The question is, if he doesn't lead him to a national title, will he be a failure? And that's something I want to talk about a little bit later in the week around quarterback expectations and how they are just downright out of control. But we'll get into that in a little bit in a couple of days. But Arch Manning, a lot on his shoulders, and if he's not the answer, there's going to be a lot of people yelling from the rooftops that he is a bust, and the noise will get louder and louder. Then you go to Penn State, and is it title or bust in 2025? And this is a very, very tough thing to say because the reality is you look at what Penn State has done the last couple of years, you probably don't feel too confident that they can make a real title run in 2025 because they've missed the mark the last couple of years, and Abdul Carter's walking out the door, and I fully understand that. But Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, and Denai Dennis Sutton have all said they're coming back for 2025. It feels like that kind of Ohio State movement. Now, I did see a good point by one of my buddies, Will Rosenblatt, that said it's more of like a 2023 Michigan moment where you have a team that is going to return two running backs that are absolutely huge. You're going to control the clock. You're going to try to play some great defense. And then you have a quarterback that might not be the most elite player in the world, but can make the throws when you absolutely need him to. Now, the other question of that is, will the wide receiver room be figured out? That's something we're just going to have to figure out through fall camp. And then they also need a DC, and we'll talk about that here in a second when we get to Clemson. But overall, it's going to be a really, really huge run for this team, and it's going to be one that they very badly need to finish off. But let me get to Anthony here for a second. But I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit lost here if I'm being totally honest, Anthony. But yeah, I don't know who the future at quarterback is for Notre Dame. I think Steve Angeli showed them some things, but when I look at that room and see the guy that really stands out to me, it's CJ Carr. He is a guy that I think is a true NFL talent. I think he's a guy that really could elevate that quarterback play, elevate that wide receiver play to a degree where they're a little bit different of an offense, a little bit more dangerous down the field. Now, there are plenty of guys in that room, and there are plenty of guys that might be a little bit more closer to the style that they were running this year, so it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. But when I look at that quarterback room, I can't find a quarterback that's as talented as CJ Carr going into 2025. For Tennessee, is Nico ready to be the guy? Because the reality of the situation is he played good football this year. They were expecting great football, but he gave them good football, and he's in a position now where he goes into 2025, and it's not going to get easier for him. He's not going to be in a better position than he was this year in terms of just outright success because the offensive line is losing both tackles. They're losing some other guys on the interior, going to be very tough, and Dylan Sampson's walking out the door. And Dylan Sampson was the offense at times. He kept this guy upright at different times because he was the guy that everyone had to focus on, and then Nico was able to get a little bit more time passing the ball. So this is a huge question, not only on the field but off the field. Is he ready to take those steps forward? Because this year he missed the mark just by that little bit, and he's not going to have the backstop that is Dylan Sampson in 2025. Then you have Indiana. Was 2024 a moment, or was it the start of something special? And I think it's one of those that people will go back and forth on. If you're in the SEC crowd, you'll probably say that it's going to be just a moment. If you're in the Big Ten crowd, you'll say it's the start of something special. But I lean towards it's going to be a special time over there in Bloomington, Indiana, and not necessarily because I think they're going to be in the CFP every single year and they're going to be right back in it in 2025. I can't make that promise by any means, but what Curt Cignetti has done has been remarkably impressive, and I'd have a hard time believing that they won't at least be in the mix going forward. I'm not saying they're going to win 10 games next year and go to the CFP. I am saying they're going to be a team you're going to have to worry about every single time you play him going forward. And you make a good point, Anthony. You know, Luke Moga is a guy that is going to be really, really fun to watch. I think Dante Moore has it relatively locked up, but at the end of the day, a lot of stuff can happen throughout that spring camp, and that is a guy I'm watching very, very closely for that job. Austin Novosad is another guy up there, but Luke Moga is a guy that they are talking about just incredibly glowingly. So definitely someone to watch there, but a lot of different guys that we'll be talking about throughout this spring, and that's definitely going to be a battle that we'll watch very closely. For SMU, can they just continue to elevate? Because there's a lot of question of, was this kind of just a flash in the pan? Did they just find a way into the ACC during a time where not a lot of teams were playing well and all these things were going kind of wrong for Clemson and wrong for Miami at different moments and especially wrong for Florida State, and they found their way to the top? Or are they a team that's just going to set up shop there? Now, in 2025, Clemson will be a ton better, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but you have Louisville, you have Georgia Tech, Miami, Syracuse, all of those teams are going to be problems. They're going to be teams that are going to be absolutely worthy of your time. And then Miami is going to continue to elevate under Carson. I don't want to say continue to elevate, but they're going to play better defense. And I think Carson Beck will be more than fine on the offensive side of the ball. So he's going to have hurdles. There's no doubt about that. This team is going to have hurdles, but they're a team that has all the money in the world and a lot of ability on that team. So I still feel very confident in them, but 2025, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a little bit of a lull for SMU. And then Clemson. Is Clemson back in 2025? And frankly, I don't even know if this is a question. I think they are firmly back in 2025. Cade Klubnik will be a true Heisman contender in that season. The wide receiver trio that they're bringing back is downright elite with TJ Moore, with Bryant Wesco, with Antonio Williams. Then you have Tom Allen coming in as the DC. Very, very good hire from Penn State. One that we'll talk about. Penn State's got to go find a new guy. Sounds like the guy might be in-house with Dan Connor, but we'll talk about that in time for sure. Definitely going to be a really interesting thing, and I think Clemson can be right back in that title conversation in 2025. I'd be surprised if they didn't make the CFP, frankly, but a lot of stuff can still happen. Of course, there's still a million different things that could go wrong between now and then, but as of right now, when I look at that Clemson team, you'd be hard-pressed to find an offense I'm more excited to watch in 2025. Cade Klubnik's been downright incredible, and that wide receiver group that they have is as elite as it possibly gets. And yeah, Anthony, you make a great point. You know, Florida State, we don't know what that's going to look like in 2025. Virginia Tech, North Carolina, and then you got a lot of other teams that you're really questioning. So SMU, I still feel very confident they're going to be in the mix, no doubt about it. I will say, I think that top three that you just put out, Miami, Clemson, and SMU, I might just slide in Louisville for that SMU team. Now, that's something we'll watch very, very closely, but it's going to be really, really interesting. He absolutely will be on the Davey O'Brien and Heisman Trophy list, no doubt about that. Going into this season, he is going to be a guy they're going to watch for everything in between. Let's be honest, coming off the year that Cam Ward had and the ability that Carson Beck does have, he's going to be talked about just about everything you can possibly think of. So he's going to be very, very hyped up going into this year the same way he was last year. Hopefully it works out just a little bit better for him this time around, but remarkable player and one of those pickups that I think could change the entirety of what Miami football is for a very long time, because you had that 1 year, that was all well and good. You get that second year, then the ball can really get rolling, and I think Carson Beck could deliver that. But let's get to our third break here, and when we come back, we got transfer portal news. We'll do a little bit of kind of a winter transfer portal post-mortem, if you will. A lot of different things have already happened. Pretty much everyone has found their landing spot, a couple of stragglers out there, but pretty much everyone's found their landing spot, and I wanted to break down where it all was and kind of just top players from every position right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the questions going into the offseason for all of the eliminated CFP teams, and one team right on the outside was Miami, and Anthony has a quick question here about Shannon Dawson. And the way that I look at it is Carson Beck is more of a pocket passer rather than what Cam Ward was. I don't think you have to change the scheme by any means. I don't think you have to change the way you go about business or the kind of routes you run or the routes you throw. I think you just have to get a better run game. I think you just have to get better play from your offensive line. So it's not necessarily I think he has to change the way that he calls plays or change the plays that he's calling in general. I do think he just has to get a little bit more from that run game, a little bit more from that offensive line, and then you could be set up for remarkable, remarkable success. But overall, I don't know. Is he talking about someone for Miami? Because there's a lot of guys, if I'm being totally honest. Transfer portal is one of those things where you see a rumor of a big time guy that could be bouncing off, and you want to look in the portal, but the reality is he might not even be in the portal yet. So it's really, really hard to get a beat on what those guys look like and, what the portal looks like at any moment, because it could be guys that are not in the portal or essentially in the portal, as we've learned over the past couple of years. So I'm not sure exactly who he's talking about. I think there's a number of guys out there that could be big-time players for them, but at the end of the day, some big-time receivers have already come off the board. So I do wonder if it might just be someone that's on a roster right about now. But we'll get into that in time. Obviously, some more details will come out around that, and we'll definitely touch on that, no doubt about it. But let's jump in here, and we'll start with the quarterbacks, just where all these guys landed, where they are going forward, and we'll start with Carson Beck. He was the number one quarterback in this class. He obviously makes his way to Miami, a great pickup for them, a great situation for him and Shannon Dawson, and hopefully he can do what Cam Ward did and definitely elevate his stock to a top 10 pick going into the 2026 draft. But Anthony, I think there will be a lot of rumors around Ryan Williams, especially, and Jeremiah Smith after this season. That's just kind of inevitable with how good they have been. I don't see either of them leaving where they are. Now, the NIL world is weird, so I can't say anything with confidence by any means, but the way that I see it, I think both those guys are in great positions, particularly Jeremiah Smith, but Ryan Williams might be one that might have a little bit more malleability to it, but at the end of the day, I don't expect either of those guys to leave, but I can't say anything with confidence. That's kind of the end-all be-all for transfer portal, is you can say something that you think is going to happen, and then the exact opposite happens. So very well might be those guys. I'd be a little bit surprised, I won't lie to you, but it's definitely something that we could watch, and definitely something that would take the college football world by storm. But when you look at the rest of the guys on the quarterback list, obviously John Mateer, huge player for Oklahoma. He's going to have to fix a lot of issues. He's going to have to patch a lot of holes, and he's going to have to be superhero at different times throughout this year. They have a huge spring portal cycle coming up once they get him intact and they figure out what they need on the outside for him. Fernando Mendoza, Miller Moss are two other guys that I think are just going to have really, really nice years at Indiana and Louisville. I think they're both guys that could very well compete for their conference titles and maybe even a CFP spot, depending on how the cookie crumbles for those guys. Luke Romanhoek and Sagapula Tele are two guys that multi-year guys, hopefully at least multi-year guys at Cal and Mississippi State. I think they're both downright special. I really love what Luke Romanhoek has done. I love what Mississippi State has done, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But overall, both these guys are very, very talented. If they stick around in those places for 2 or 3 years, I really think they can be downright stars, even at Mississippi State and Cal. I promise you can still be stars at those programs. And then Darian Mensah, we've talked about quite a bit. That NIL money was very, very nice. And he is going to be a multiple year guy there, and we'll see how that works out. They kicked Malik Murphy out the door. We'll see if they regret that. Malik Murphy found his way up to Oregon State. So a lot of talent in this group. You also have guys, Jackson Arnold made his way to Auburn. You have Caden Salter going to Colorado, likely to be their starter. Bo Pribula over to Missouri. So tons of guys that have bounced around, that have come off the board, and tons of guys that will continue to come off the board. One of my favorites is Thomas Castellanos down there at Florida State, as well as Mark Gronowski over there at Iowa. Going to be a really, really fun group to watch, and definitely you have that star power up top. You also have some guys that you might not be thinking about right now, but I think could absolutely explode in 2025. Yeah, I really do think he will, Anthony. I think Luke Romanhoek is a guy that we don't really know what he is, right? It's very hard to get a beat on what he is exactly when you don't have the tape that you would love to have on the kid. But he has the ability to make a ton of different throws. I do think this offseason with all the first-team reps will do him a lot of different favors, and Jeff Lebby with that, elevated offense, with that accelerated offense, makes it a little bit easier for young quarterbacks to just kind of get the ball, make one hitch, find the open receiver, get it out of your hands, and then keep it moving. I think he's going to be really, really effective. And Connor Wegman is a guy I probably should have talked about just a little bit here, because he is going to be a remarkable player. That's the one that I love the most, if I'm being totally honest. He is the guy that I think could elevate Houston into a position where maybe they're even competing for a Big 12 title. I really love that pickup, and I definitely think it's one that might just fit absolutely perfectly with what Willie Fritz loves to do. But moving forward to the wide receivers, because that was kind of the biggest group of this portal class, and Eric Singleton was setting the pace. Remarkable player from Georgia Tech, found his way over to Auburn. Was a little bit of an interesting recruitment throughout that one, but he found his way to Auburn. Zachariah Branch right after him, another speedster, found his way to UGA. So very, very talented guys, two guys that are incredible players, and I think they're going to make huge effects on their teams in 2025. Frankly, I think both those guys will be the wide receiver one for both those teams. Then you do have guys like Deuce Robinson, Dane Key, Nick Anderson, all guys that are going to be absolutely huge for their teams. I absolutely love Dane Key. I think he's going to be a breakout star. And then you get to Kevin Concepcion, Micah Hudson. Also add Mario Craver to that A&M mix. Really, really good stuff from A&M when you talk about that wide receiver class. Same thing with UGA, same thing with LSU, getting Barry and Brown as well. Really talented guys in this group. And then you look at Notre Dame. Horatio Fields is a huge pickup from Wake Forest. And then you look at another guy, they got Malachi Fields from Virginia. They might just be turning a corner at that wide receiver position when you talk about Notre Dame. And then the guy that I'm watching the closest out of this group, weirdly enough, is Deuce Robinson. I think he can make all the difference in the world, and absolutely is a guy that can make all huge changes. And I just don't have CJ Daniels on this list because he wasn't listed as a top 10 receiver on that 247. Do think he's going to have a massive effect on that team. No doubt about it. He's a very, very talented player, and I do think he can tap into a little bit more of what he had at Liberty than what he had at LSU, but just went off what 247 had here, and they had him, I believe, at 11 or 12, if I'm not mistaken, was right off this list, but remarkably talented guy, and cannot wait to see what he can do at Miami this year. Another guy, Eric Rivers at Georgia Tech, is another guy to watch, kind of that Eric Singleton replacement. Then you got transfer portal defenders, and this is a little bit more of a mixed bag. You do have a lot of defensive ends that are making big-time effects in this one, and Patrick Payton's the one leading the way. I frankly think he's going to be a downright star. I think he's going to explode in that Blake Baker offense. I think he's going to have double-digit sacks, and he's going to be a guy that we look at as maybe the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. I think he is that good, and I think he's in a position to succeed at that level. And then Prince Willem Manuelin followed his brother Princely to Ole Miss. You have Williams Winnowari making all types of plays for Missouri. He's found his way over to Nebraska. Big-time pickup for the Huskers in so many different ways. But then you got the defensive tackle talent. You know, Jaheim Otis, David Blay, I absolutely love this pickup for Miami. I think he's going to be a downright star in 2025. And then David Gusta finding his way to Kentucky, kind of a Deion Walker replacement there. Lee Hunter's another incredible defensive tackle. Romello Height's a guy that I think is going to be a star at Texas Tech and really make himself some money in 2025. So these defenders are downright elite. Takario Davis did make his way back to college over to his old coach in Jed Fish up there in Washington. And then you do have Damon Wilson still on the board, and there's a lot of different teams out there, Anthony. You know, Miami definitely could be in this mix. I've seen Texas, Ohio State, Missouri as kind of the big three teams, but frankly, this one seems to have twists and turns every single day. So I could very well see that finding its way over to Miami. As of right now, I'd lean Ohio State because he had a little bit more a connection to them coming out of high school, but frankly, you could take your pick here and I would totally back you. It's a very, very interesting recruitment and one that is probably the biggest one still left on the board in the portal. And then just look at the top 10 teams as of right now. LSU only has 16 commits, doing a great job pulling in some very quality guys, especially up front on that defensive line, and just patching holes on the back end with guys like Mansour Deline. Then you have Ole Miss doing the Ole Miss thing. Same thing with Florida State, just kind of doing what they do every offseason. Florida State does have to be very careful with this portal class. Definitely one that will probably take a little bit more of a fine-tooth comb over in a couple of weeks because it's definitely one that's going to be a little bit worrisome as we head into this season. But then you do have Auburn done a really, really good job rebuilding that offense, but still have worries about what Jackson Arnold can do in that offense. Then you do have guys like Nebraska making big-time names, Kentucky replacing huge players across that defense. Mississippi State is the one that I've loved the most. They've done an incredible job of building up this team and just elevating the talent level. It's not going to be a great team in 2025. I don't expect them to win the SEC or really be in contention to win the SEC. What I do expect is really concrete steps forward, and I do think that's the biggest thing here is you got to find your guys, and Jeff Lebby is slowly doing that. He's done a great job in the portal this cycle. I think he's going to be a guy that continues to build from this and does really, really awesome things going forward. Yeah, Florida State's a question to me. I have a million different questions about what Florida State looks like after this year because the reality of their situation is they don't have good enough guys to play in 2025, so they have to go into the portal. But the problem is they lean on the portal a little bit too much because high school recruiting is the bedrock of every great program around the country. So I do think it's going to be a very, very hard tightrope walk for Mike Norvell, and the reality is they come up with a 7-5 record next year. He might just be out the door. So it's going to be a very, very weird year over there in Florida State. And to me, I just don't think they're approaching this the right way. I don't think they did at the beginning, and I think it's catching up to them just a little bit. So that'll be a fascinating thing to watch, but the winter portal has kind of tamped down. Now, you still have guys out there. You have Emmanuel Pregnon as guy you're going to want to watch. Damon Wilson we talked about, but then you have, running backs that have already committed. Justice Haynes to Michigan, Fluff Bothwell to Mississippi State. You have Patrick Kudas going to Ole Miss. Very, very talented players, flew all over the place, and wanted to make sure everyone knew at least grandiose where they all were. We'll definitely get into that in more detail throughout time, but definitely something to watch. And let's take our final break here. And when we come back, I got my top 10 Tuesday for you guys. Just the best players in the national title as I see it. Neither of the quarterbacks made this list. It is a very, very fun list, though. Very, very tough to put together, but I'll roll it out right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a little bit of a wrap up on the transfer portal for the winter cycle. It's always going to get a little bit weirder in the spring cycle, so we will obviously be watching that very closely, but overall, remarkable portal cycle and a lot of different implications coming out of it. But let's get into a little bit of a top 10 Tuesday. Let's talk about the top players, in the national title. Going to be a very, very tough list to put together. I probably had 20-25 guys that were rolling around in my mind, and I officially found my way to those 10 guys that I think are the very best in this game, and it's a lot of Ohio State. I'll be totally honest with you off the bat. But at the end of the day, let's go ahead and jump into this thing. And Latham Ransom is the guy I want to start with. This is the guy that should get way more love than he gets right now. But the reality is he plays next to Caleb Downs, and that is going to take a lot of attention away from you. But 72 tackles, a sack, 1 INT, 3 forced fumbles on the year. The guy's a star. He's absolutely incredible to watch. He's only gotten better throughout his Ohio State career, and he's one of those guys that you might not notice him all the time on the football field. He is making winning plays pretty much every single time. He's going to make the right play 9 out of 10 times. He will fly downhill with the best of them, and frankly, I would be shocked if he wasn't a 10-year vet in the NFL. He plays so smart, plays so instinctively, and you can put him in a number of different places because of how his career has kind of bounced him around just a little bit at those safety positions. So really talented kid. I think he's going to make a huge impact on this game, the same way he made a huge impact on that toss play against Texas. He was definitely a huge player in that game, and he's one of those guys that I just don't think gets nearly the respect that he deserves. Might be one of the most underrated players in the entire country. Donovan Jackson here at 9. This is the guy that has probably made more money over the last month as anyone in the entire country. He has done such a good job. He was kicked out to tackle after that Josh Simmons injury, and even after that Seth McLaughlin injury, he was asked to do just that little bit more, especially in the run game, was definitely going to be a bigger piece of that, and leadership was going to be a bigger piece of that. He's been huge for this team, been absolutely remarkable, has not given up a sack the entirety of the CFP, and he's one of those guys guys that just makes all the difference in the world. When you have that anchor on the left side of your offensive line, even if he was a left guard, now he's a left tackle. He can make some big-time plays. Remarkable player, and I'd be shocked if an NFL team let him slide anywhere past the middle of the second round, if I'm being totally honest. Jeremiah Love is here at number 8, and I said that Ohio State has the better running backs overall. If this guy is healthy and fully 100%, this is the best running back in this game. He is downright incredible, and the ability for him to jump cut, the ability for him to catch passes out of the backfield, to hurdle over people pretty much every second he gets. But the reality is, over 1,000 yards on the ground, 200 yards receiving this year. He is a guy that can make all the difference in the world. He might not be as conventional. I don't even want to say that. He is as conventionally talented as Travion Henderson, but the reality is the guy's production is remarkable, and he does just about everything you could possibly want a running back to do. Very much love what Jeremiah Love brings in. Frankly, if he was getting drafted this year, I'd definitely draft him, but he's not, so I'm going to be looking at those Heisman odds going into 2025. Howard Cross here at number 7, a very huge player for the interior of that Notre Dame defense, and a guy, especially with Riley Mills out, that needs to play big-time football on Monday, but a guy that gets all types of push, and he's a great pass rusher as well, 4 sacks on the year while dealing with injuries. Very talented guy, and definitely someone that, you look at this Ohio State offensive line, they are very good. They've done an incredible job throughout this tournament, and I don't really doubt them too much in this game. That being said, this is an absolute beast. This is a problem on the interior, and definitely a guy that could make that Seth McLaughlin injury look a little bit bigger of a deal than the last couple of teams have. A huge player, and I think he's going to be one of those guys that has to make a huge impact in this game. Then you got Emeka Egbuka, and this is a guy that I absolutely love. And you get overshadowed just a little bit because there's a downright alien on this team. We'll talk about him here in a second, but his route running is about as good as you're going to find in the country. His hands, the exact same, about as good as you're going to find in the country. And his confidence in different spots on the field is really remarkable. You know, you can put him right in the slot. You can put him all the way on the outside. You can put him in the backfield, and he can make plays. He's a very talented player, and he has as much confidence, as much energy as anyone on the field. And I think more than anything, he's kind of the engine of this pass game. He's not necessarily the guy that is going to make all the catches in the world and do everything out there on the football field, but he absolutely is the guy that's going to create space for others. He absolutely is the guy that is going to get that third down catch or fourth down catch that they very much need, like he did against Texas in that big time moment. So he's a huge player. He's a guy that I absolutely love. Nearing 1,000 yards on the season, 10 touchdowns this year, elite blocker on the outside, which is a huge part of this, but he is a guy that is remarkable in every single way, and if you didn't have Jeremiah Smith on your team, he would be one of the best wide receivers in the country. He definitely already is, but he would be treated a little bit more like that if Jeremiah Smith wasn't on this squad. And then you move into the top 5. JT Tuimoloau is downright incredible. He is an athletic beast in every sense of the word. He gets off the ball about as fast as anyone in the entire country, and he is so physical with his hands when he gets to offensive linemen. He will make plays in this game. I can almost promise you that. He made a ton of plays in that Texas game before getting dinged up just a little bit. Should be more than fine for that Monday game, but 11.5 sacks on the year, 3 pass breakups. He is someone that has that takeover ability that we saw from Jack Sawyer against Texas. He absolutely has that, and he's a great player and going to be an elite NFL player. Cannot wait to see what he can do at the next level. Very talented guy, and definitely someone that I just think has a little bit left in the tank. You know, he's one of those seniors that found his way back to Ohio State after that past year. Could have very well been in the NFL right now, but decided to come back, and he's looking for his moment in the sun, and I think there will be no better moment than on Monday, and he's a remarkable player. Cannot wait to see what he can do in this game. His counterpart on the other side, his partner in crime, Jack Sawyer, remarkable. 9 sacks on the season, so a little bit behind JT, but 6 pass breakups, 1 INT, 3 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries, and 2 touchdowns. The dude is an absolute game wrecker. He is a monster, and it's someone that has been on a downright mission the last couple of weeks. He's been all over the place, been making play after play after play, and he's one of those guys that is leading the way in this for this team in a million different ways. It's not just, he's making all the plays on the football field. He is the outright heartbeat of this team. He's the leader. He is the guy that everyone follows, and he is the guy that could have his huge moment in the sun on Monday. Now, he already had it very nicely in that Texas game, but at the end of the day, this would be the ultimate prize, the one that he's been waiting for. really his entire life. To be a national champion for the Ohio State Buckeyes is his dream, and he has a very good chance to accomplish that on Monday. Xavier Watts here at 3, and there's going to be an argument back and forth between 3 and 2. I had the argument back and forth, but the ability of Xavier Watts is downright insane. He should be a first-round draft pick to me, and he's a guy that can create all types of problems for any quarterback that he faces, because it's not only that he's a great in run support, he's 75 tackles, second on the team, 6 INTs, a forced fumble on the year. The guy is a true difference maker, and he's someone that does such a good job in film study that he knows where the quarterback's going before the quarterback knows where he's going. He is so good with his eyes, obviously follows the quarterback very, very well, and he's one of those guys that can just totally change a game. Very, very talented, and he flies downhill in the run game. Obviously is a great kind of center fielder when you talk about safety, and he's a guy that needs to make big-time plays in this game, especially against Will Howard in that pass game, if they want to come out on top. The other safety in this game I would give the very, very slight edge to over Xavier Watts. Caleb Downs is a difference maker in every sense of the word. He is a guy that I can't even fathom how he is that good at football. I'll be totally honest. He is only a sophomore, but he has 76 tackles on the year. He has 2 interceptions, but it's not only that. This guy might not light up the stat sheet every single game. He is going to make every single play that is in front of him. He will not miss a tackle. He will not miss a gap. He will not miss an opening. And he will make just about every play you need him to make on the back end as well. He is a guy that, frankly, if he could go in this cycle, he would be a top 10 draft pick. He is that big of a difference maker. He is that big of a just absolute athletic freak, and I would give him the very, very slight edge over Xavier Watts. I think you could flip those guys, and I would have no problem. Frankly, I had them flipped, and then I flipped them back, so would totally understand wherever you come from on that one, but it's pretty clear why this guy is going to be a top 10 pick when he finally does leave for the NFL draft, but special player, and I think he's got a huge chance to make a big-time name for himself on Monday. And this is the guy. I really don't know that this one needs to be explained too much. This might be the very best player in the country, period, going into 2025, and he is a guy that it's title time now. He's got to be able to really set up. He was handled last week against Texas. The difference is, obviously, Notre Dame is going to play a little bit more man coverage, and that is a nightmare when you're facing Jeremiah Smith. So what does that look like? How much do they play in man coverage? Do they drop back into the zone a little bit more often? And how do they deal with this kid is going to be a huge, huge question. Texas was able to do it pretty effectively, but the schemes that these two teams run are entirely differently. But 1,200 yards on the season, 14 touchdowns, and has made play after play after play throughout this tournament. He is an absolute difference maker, and I've said it before, we got to test his DNA. We got to see what's going on in there that's different than every other human, because he is not normal in any sense of the word. He is remarkable, and he's one of those guys that is going to be a superstar. You could fit him for a gold jacket right now. Just hold on to it for 15 years because he's coming to get it at some point. But overall, remarkable players all across the board. Obviously, Ohio State has a little bit more of that firepower than Notre Dame has, at least in terms of those individual players. But as we've noticed throughout this last little bit, Notre Dame wins games as a team. That's how they go about business, and they've done it the last couple of games. No reason to believe they can't do it in this one. But remarkable stuff to talk about as we get throughout this week. Next week, or tomorrow, I want to get into a couple of different things. Get into the CFP, kind of a postmortem look into how it went. Arguments on both sides, why it was great, why it was not so great. We'll look at the Big Ten's control over the sport and how long that's going to last, and a couple of different things on tomorrow's show. A little bit of a diverging from the NFL or from the national championship just for a day, and then we'll get back to the business, no doubt about that. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We got great people covering every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports you could possibly need, please come into GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about the CFP and all of the issues and great parts about it on tomorrow's show. So tune in at 9 a.m. Eastern, and I will see you then.